Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to another exciting Sunday of Journey Church Underground. We call it that because we can't actually physically assemble and meet. Now, I do think that's an important part of church life, to actually physically in the flesh be together, and we're being denied that right now. It's kind of a time of storm in our lives, I think, and that's exactly where the Lord's put us in Scripture. We've been studying through the book of Acts for over a year, and the exciting thing, I think you can see it up on the screen here, we only have 2 weeks left after this morning. After this Sunday, we only have 2 weeks left. We will actually end our study in Acts the Sunday before Mother's Day, which I couldn't have planned over a year ago, but we're going to end that study. And then I'm going to do a standalone Mother's Day message, and I'm really excited about that. I've already been working on it. I love my mom, and I've had several church moms over the years. I've had church grandmas, my grandma Margie when I was a little kid. I've had wonderful women in my life who are godly, who have influenced me for Christ. And I've always appreciated that. So I love Mother's Day. And by the way, that opening video this morning, my daughter helped me pick that. She thought the Under the Sea was fantastic. My son loves to swim, so I think he'll enjoy it too. So good morning, Paul and Josie. I hope you're enjoying the video today. And it's an exciting story of a shipwreck. So whatever age you are, doesn't everybody love a shipwreck story? And this is a good one. It's, I think, excellent. And Luke, who's on the ship with Paul and the team, writes this. He writes the narrative of this. And you might think, how can you preach from a story? Well, here's the thing about the story of godly people on a mission for the Lord, who have given their entire life to Him. When you look at the story of their life, you learn valuable lessons about what to do and what not to do. And today, I'm going to tell you this morning, I'm going to tell you 3 things from this story that you should do while you wait or in a storm. And while you're waiting in a storm, let's put all that together. But everybody wants, I think, some kind of a checklist. Like right now, we're in this pandemic, we're in this quarantine, we're stuck at home a lot. What do we do? My wife and I were laughing this morning. We heard on the news today, it's an actual news story. They were talking about how there's more trash being put by the curb right now because people are cleaning their homes more. Well, we already noticed that in our neighborhood for the last 2 to 3 weeks. And it's the perfect time for spring cleaning anyway. But now to have some extra time around the house, why not? Why not get it out there? And that's the thing. We're all looking for things to do. Now, I'm going to give you 3 things to do from this passage today. And by the way, when you're doing 3 things, there are also many things you don't do because you're committing to those things. But if you want to pull out a pen and some paper and write down the to-do checklist, I'm going to give that to you in a minute. But first, I'm going to read through this passage, and I'm going to ask you, what do you think the things are? So as I'm reading this, I want you to listen. But before I jump into that, let me give you just a little more background in case you haven't been tracking with our study. Or even if you have, Paul is going to Rome to have a court before Nero, to be judged by Nero, to put his case before Nero, who is the Caesar at this time. And yes, it is the same Nero who burns half of Rome and blames the Christians. And there's heavy persecution against believers. This is that Nero that Paul is going to try to share the gospel with and see if he will come to Christ. Now, we're in Acts 27 now, but all the way back in Acts 23 is when the Lord tells Paul that he's going to Rome. And this is when Paul is sitting in a Roman barracks. Why is he sitting in a Roman barracks? He's there in Jerusalem. He's been in the temple. And the Jews start to grab him and they want to kill him because they think he's ruining the faith trying to tell people about Jesus. They think he's saying Judaism isn't important anymore. And he used to be one of them. And they turn on him so severely, the Romans actually save him and bring him to their barracks. And he's in that barracks and he's down. And it says in Acts 23:11 that God stood by him and said, Paul, just as you've been a martyr for me, or sharing the faith out of your life here for me, just as you have given the gospel here in Jerusalem, I'm going to send you to be a martyr in Rome. I'm going to send you to Rome to speak about me there and to lay down your life for me. Powerful thing. a powerful thing. You're going to get to give the gospel in Rome just as you gave it here. And the root word of that is martyr. You're going to get to give your life for me in Rome. So Paul has known for over 2 years, that was over 2 years before, that he's going to eventually get to Rome. But now the path hasn't been easy. He spent 2 years in Caesarea, sitting in under house arrest. He went under one trial with Felix, the governor, first, and then after 2 years, Felix left, and there was Festus. Then he had another trial with Festus. Neither one of these guys found anything wrong with him, but they didn't want to set him loose because they didn't want the Jews mad at them. So they punted. Felix punted to Festus. Festus now punted to Nero. But Paul was going to get to go and have his counsel and finally be with the church in Rome, where I believe Paul had wanted to be for a very long time. But here's the thing, after all this time, now he's in a ship in a storm. He thinks he's finally headed towards Rome, and they just can't seem to get there. Blown off course, not just weeks, but months off the target date. And Paul isn't frustrated. Paul knows, I think, something that you and I need to learn as we go through the storms of life that we're going through right now. I don't know when our church is going to be able to gather and meet again. Paul didn't know when he was going to get to Rome. But I know we will be together, and I think Paul knows he will eventually make it. But just because you're waiting on the Lord and waiting on a promise doesn't mean he's not going to deliver. Sometimes we give up. We think the promise isn't coming, and we don't stay true. We don't stay true to the Lord. And we do some of the things in this passage that are the wrong things instead of making the right choices. That I think you will see through this passage, Paul always makes the right choices. And it makes him ministry ready. It makes him ministry ready wherever he goes because he's already decided to fully trust the Lord. So let me read this and see if you can find the 3 things that are going to be on my to-do checklist as I read this story. There are 3 things in this that are guaranteed things that you should do. And right now, if you're asking, what should I do? What do I do? You're going to find some help, some real help in this passage. This passage is written in story form. It's written as a narrative. And why is it written as a narrative? It's written as a narrative so you and I can take our lives and put them into this story and think about what we're doing. Think about our actions. We can see the life of a faithful man here and faithful people on this boat and unfaithful people. And we can put our lives in there and say, what difference does it make in my to-do checklist if I'm faithful? What difference does it make if I understand the faith journey of Paul after all these years? How does he respond now to the Lord? Is he afraid? Is he nervous? Is he annoyed that it's taking so long? Is he pushing himself forward ahead of other people? Or is he valuing everybody around him? These are good questions. And these are good questions for us as we go through the storm we're in now or all the storms of life. How do we view things? So I want you to listen to this story, listen to this narrative, put yourself into it, and ask what's on our to-do checklist. All right, let's jump in. Acts 27, verses 27 through 44. It says, when the 14th night came, we were drifting in the Adriatic Sea. In the middle of the night, the sailors thought they were approaching land. They took a sounding and found it to be 120 feet deep. When they had sailed a little further and they sounded again, they found it to be 90 feet deep. Then, fearing we might run aground on some rocky place, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight to come. Some sailors tried to escape from the ship. They had let down the skiff into the sea, pretending that they were going to put out anchors from the bow. Paul said to the centurion, this is Julius, and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut the ropes, holding the skiff, and let it drop away. When it was about daylight, Paul urged them all to take food, saying, today is the 14th day that you have been waiting and going without food, and having eaten nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for this has to do with your survival. Since none of you will lose a hair from your head. After he said these things, Paul had taken some bread, and he gave thanks to God in the presence of all of them, and when he broke it, he began to eat. they all became encouraged and took food themselves. In all, there were 276 of us on the ship. When they had eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing the grain overboard into the sea. When the daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but sighted a bay with a beach. They planned to run the ship ashore if they could. After casting off the anchors, they left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and headed for the beach. But they struck a sandbar and ran the ship aground. The bow jammed fast and remained immovable, while the stern began to break up by the pounding of the waves. The soldiers' plan was to kill all the prisoners so that no one could swim away and escape. But the centurion kept them from carrying out their plan because he wanted to save Paul. So he ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to follow, some on planks and some on debris from the ship. In this way, everyone safely reached the shore. That's an exciting ship story, isn't it? And everybody loves this story, I bet. I hope my kids loved hearing this story. I mean, it's exciting. And it's true. And I love the fact that Luke was there to record this. I love that he was seeing this firsthand. And I want to tell you, there's a to-do checklist in this to tell us what to do in the storm. Did you follow it? Did you follow what Paul was doing? Did you follow how they kept checking? I love how they keep checking the depth at the beginning. It's kind of like us checking the news or checking our phones. What's going on in the world? What's going on with the Corona update today? What is going on? Where are we? How close are we to being out of here? How close are we to being able to go back to work? How close are we to be able to see some baseball? They just kept checking. And I love verse 30. Some of the sailors tried to escape from the ship. They let down the skiff into the sea, pretending that they were going to put out anchors. Paul ratted them out. In verse 31, he said to Julius and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay on the ship, you can't be saved." The soldiers cut the ropes, dropped the skiff into the sea. You know, the to-do checklist. The first thing we don't do is when God is directing you, don't jump ship. Don't jump ship. If God's directing you and he has a plan for you, stay with that plan. Paul early on in the verses we went over last week came out and said, "The Lord has told me that none of you will perish." And you might think, well, if none of them perish, why can't some of them leave in the skiff? Because did you hear what happens as they get towards it? It's going to take all the men of this ship to get them to that sandbar, to get them to land. They're going to have to do some things, and they're going to need everybody there. And you can say, but the Lord said he's going to save them. Well, he is. But they're going to have to do some things too. And this is the first thing, this is the dynamic that I want to bring out before I jump into all of the things on the to-do checklist. I think the important thing is sometimes we think the supernatural work of God can come without any personal responsibility from us. And throughout all of Scripture, there is a tie between people being personally responsible towards their faith in God and God's supernatural power working through them. Jesus is the greatest example. The Scriptures say that Jesus did everything the Father asked. But whose life was the Father's power most evident through always to do all kinds of miracles? It was the life of Jesus. In the Old Testament, when David went out before Goliath, was God's power on him? David didn't bring Goliath down. The Lord brought Goliath down using David. We should be clear on these things. But David did have to go out there, trembling, shaking, not able to wear armor, nothing but a sling. Matter of fact, he took too many stones. He only needed one. But he took more. Wasn't his most faithful moment. But here's the thing. In this, the supernatural of God and personal responsibility, Paul knows that. Paul has seen that. Paul has been personally responsible to listen to everything the Lord tells him and to be responsible as best he knows how. And he's seen the Lord's power show up and work through him in amazing ways. Not just in healings, but in people coming to know the Lord, giving their lives to him and following him. There's personal responsibility mixed in. But the first thing, I already mentioned it on our to-do checklist, is don't jump ship. Stay faithful. Stay faithful to the Lord. There were 2 frogs, and they were in this bucket at a farm, a bucket of milk. And it was starting to get a little sunny out, and the milk was getting nice and warm, and one of the frogs just wanted to go to sleep in the milk and just sink to the bottom and just die. He didn't know if he'd get out. And the other frog kept saying, no, help me. Let's just paddle, trust me, paddle. And the 2 frogs started paddling, and they paddled and paddled until that warm milk became butter, and they both hopped out. It took both of them staying faithful and staying aware. It took one of them encouraging the others. Don't jump ship. Don't sink to the bottom. Don't get out of here. I'm going to need your help churning this. And here's the thing. If you're tempted to jump ship from your marriage, from an important relationship, from your church, whatever it is that you know God has called you to, but you're struggling with something and you want to jump ship, you got to think about how it's going to affect other people in that ship. Now, you might fall out with me on this. I've had people say before, should I just stay with my wife because of the kids? I've said, yeah. I don't care what your reason is for staying and trying to work it out and actually getting some help working it out. I want you to get help working it out. But no one can help you if you aren't first committed to trying and staying. People have asked me before why my marriage works, how my marriage has made it almost 25 years now. You know why? I'll give you the secret. It's because my wife and I have never wanted to go back home to our parents. Now, we love our parents, but we haven't wanted to admit defeat, so we've had to work things out. And I don't want to ruin it for anybody. We've had some fights. We've had some tough times. We've had some struggles. But you know what? We never jumped ship. We stayed faithful. And that makes a difference. And here, Paul sees some people getting ready to jump ship, go their own way, come up with their own way out, save themselves ahead of everybody else. And he knows God doesn't honor that kind of behavior. Saving yourself at the expense of other people, leaving them more work because you're mad about something, you're going to take your ball and go home, is not pleasing to the Lord. And Paul was standing up as a man of God. He wasn't just ratting them out. He was saying, listen, everybody needs to be in this together for us all to make it through. That's the way the Lord works. He's faithful, and we need to be faithful. Don't jump ship. And I'm here to tell you today, whatever you're going through right now, don't jump ship. Stay with what the Lord has for you. If God is directing you through the storm, stay in the boat with him. Listen to him. Work through it over time. Anybody here, Paul could have been the most impatient because of everything he's been through, and yet he's the one most ready to be faithful through the storm. That should make an impact to the narrative to us about what godly men and women do. We stay faithful and we don't jump ship. Even when things are hard, personally challenging, we think there's an easier way out. Listen, God didn't come to make things easy. He came to encourage our faithfulness to him, and he has faithfulness to us. He will guide us through in his time, but we need to give him that time. All right, second point. I love this. This is my favorite part here. But the second point, this is my favorite, and you're going to see why in just a second, because I'm a big man and I like to eat. It says, verse 33, when it was about daylight, Paul urged them all to take food, saying, today is the 14th day, and you've been waiting and going without food. You have eaten nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for this has to do with your survival, since none of you will lose a hair from your head. After Paul said these things, and he took some bread, he gave thanks to God in the presence of all of them, and when he broke it, he began to eat, and they all became encouraged and took food for themselves. Now, I love this. This is a big meal, right? They hadn't eaten in a while. 14 days, they hadn't seen sun, moon, or stars. They didn't know where to go. They were drifting around aimlessly, and the last bits of food that they hadn't thrown overboard, Paul gets out and says, let's have a meal. And do you know why Paul is saying, let's have a meal? He's saying, if God is strengthening you for something, eat. Eat the meal. If God is strengthening you for some kind of service, eat the meal. Get ready. Be ready, because we're about to work for the Lord. Now, somebody could have said, but you said God's going to save us. And I think Paul would have said, yeah, and we're going to do some swimming. We're going to do some work in this saving exercise. Now, our works aren't going to save us. God is going to save us. But he's going to ask us to do our part. And our part is to eat the meal. Now, I don't know. Sometimes when I get really depressed or I'm really sad about something, I'll stop eating. I'll take more walks and I'll stop eating, and I have a hard time sleeping. And that's just the way I deal with depression or tough times. I'll keep dwelling on something until I can't think about it anymore. Now, some people do the opposite, where they eat a lot or sleep a lot. I know I've talked to several people that have told me, listen, I'm gaining a lot of weight right now because I'm stuck in the house. And being near your refrigerator can be a problem. I understand that light inside the fridge. I want to hook up a buzzer so it's more of a warning system than a welcoming light, but that's for another time. But the meal here is about readiness. And it reminded me of a story. You've probably all heard this story. There's a guy sitting on his roof. There's been a big flood. There's water everywhere. And a guy floats by in an inner tube, and he says, swim out to me. I've got another tube here. And the guy says, no, I've prayed. The Lord's going to save me. Thank you. And the guy with the tubes floats away. And then another guy comes up in a canoe, and he's got his dog in the front, and he's in the back, and he says, come on down. We can squeeze you in this canoe. And the guy said, listen, I didn't want to swim before. I don't want to squeeze now. Go ahead. I've prayed. The Lord's going to take care of me. Well, a little while longer goes on, and then a chopper shows up, and it comes down, and they throw that little rope ladder. You know what those little ladders look like. And the guy's yelling, climb up. And the guy says, I don't want to climb. I don't want to swim. I don't want to squeeze. I don't want to climb. The Lord's going to take care of me. The chopper guy flies away. Well, the guy ends up drowning. The waters get higher and higher, suck him under. He dies. He gets to heaven, and he says to the Lord, he says, Lord, I prayed and I thought you were going to save me. And the Lord says, listen, I sent 3 guys and a dog, and you wouldn't do a thing. Eat the meal. A little bit of work, and what a joyful work it was. And at the end of the meal, they threw everything else, all the other food, over, because that was their last meal. That was their last bit of energy, but they were going to need it for the swim that was to come ahead. And I love the fact that Paul was almost treating this like a communion, where he was breaking bread and giving thanks. And he was encouraging them as a community. Listen, we're going to need to be faithful. Nobody jump ship. We all work together to provide safety for each other. And now we all need to eat this meal of readiness, because we need to be ready. The Lord is about to work. You know, some of us aren't ready for the Lord to work in our lives. We haven't been faithful. We certainly don't know when to eat the meal. We got to be ready. You got to be ready. You got to be watching for the Lord, hopeful for the Lord, excited about the Lord. If you're living like dreary like Eeyore all the time, that's not what the Lord has for you. That's not the Lord's best for you. Even in the darkest of days, you know, the darkest of days, that was a tongue twister. You know the morning is coming. Fix your eyes on the horizon and get ready for the sun to come up at some point. Watch your readiness. And the third thing, way down in verse 42, it says the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none could swim away and escape. Now, the reason the soldiers had this plan was, if a prisoner escaped, the soldier would become accountable for whatever the prisoner was charged with. So if a prisoner was charged with murder, then the soldier would face the penalty for murder. Whatever they were charged. So these soldiers, by saying, let's kill them, were saving their own lives at the expense of somebody else. This is exactly a replay of some of the men on the boat trying to take that skiff and get away. And you would think Paul is the one who's going to speak out, right, and save himself. Oh, Julius does. But the centurion kept them from carrying out their plan because he wanted to save Paul. Now, because this Roman centurion wanted to save Paul, all the prisoners are saved. Isn't that what the Lord said to Paul earlier in the first part of this passage, and I think around verse 11 or something? And when the Lord tells Paul, listen, you're going to be blessed because everybody, not just you, but everybody on the ship is going to be saved because of you. Now, a good portion of the prisoners are saved because of Paul. Now, Paul didn't see this coming, and the centurion is the one who seems to be in charge here. Now, Paul was in charge up here with the don't escape and the let's eat. But now suddenly the centurion seems to be in charge. And he's the one that issues the order. And I love in verse 44, it says, the rest were to follow on planks, some on debris from the ship. In this way, everyone safely reached the shore. In this way, under the command of the Roman centurion here. Through this passage, Paul and the centurion seem like they're working together to bring God's will, to bring everybody to safety. That's interesting. It's interesting to me that Paul evidently doesn't care who gets credit for what the Lord is doing, because Paul isn't filled with pride after the uncovering this plot with the skiff. He isn't filled with pride after eating this meal and giving everybody energy. He isn't standing up here and saying, why would you guys do this? Or why is Julius suddenly, why is this Roman centurion suddenly taking command? I've been the one the Lord's lifted up. Paul doesn't get in an argument about who is supposed to be in charge. I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase before. You get more accomplished when no one cares who gets credit. And I think Paul knew the Lord enough that he was going to stay humble. And that's the third thing is, if the Lord has you under his protection, stay under his protection. Don't get full of yourself and think, I've done great. I've been faithful. I'm so ready. And I'm going to run off without you now, Lord. Paul doesn't do that. Paul doesn't say he has to stay in control. He listens to the Roman centurion and he lets this man take charge at the end. Paul stays under the protection of God. Everybody stays under God's protection. And there's humility here among this company, and they all get to shore safely. So what is our to-do checklist? Don't jump ship. Eat the meal. If the Lord has a meal for you to get you ready, eat the meal, relax a little bit, get some sleep, and be ready for the Lord to work. He may have you work a lot tomorrow, so get some rest today. Stay under the protection of the Lord. If the Lord's working, don't rise up and try to point all the glory to yourself. Stay under the Lord's protection, stay in humility. There are a lot of great men of faith over the years that they get arrogant or get proud, and pride comes before a fall. Now, that's more than just something my mom would tell me growing up. It's true. Somebody thinks there's something and they're nothing, and it's a big pit to fall into. Paul doesn't do that here. Paul stays humble, and he listens. And he's directed by the Roman centurion, and they all get to shore safely. Glory to God. In everything we're going through right now, sometimes there can be a lot of voices. Everybody wants to be the hero. Stay humble. Stay little. Stay precious to the Lord. One of the things that stands out to me at the end is, no matter how much the Lord used Paul to be a light of faithfulness, to keep everybody together, to be a light to the meal, to make sure everybody... The Lord didn't shine a light on him to make him the everything. Paul was still fragile. He wasn't invulnerable. These soldiers could have taken him out at a moment's notice if it wasn't for the God's good blessing upon the centurion to have his heart towards Paul, to protect Paul. We're all fragile. And in moments like this, when things are going on in our world, we're reminded of how fragile we are. Even if we think we have a lot of money, or we think we have a great job, or we think we have everything together, or this big family unit, or all these friends, no matter what we think we have, suddenly the world can take it all away, and we can realize in a moment of true humility that we're prisoners to this world, and we're capable of being killed in a heartbeat, unless the Lord steps in and gives us some favor and brings us across to where we need to be. And that happens to Paul at the end of this chapter, and I think that's a blessing to him. I think it's a blessing for a man and woman of God to stay humble and to remember who we are. We're frail, but the Lord loves us, and He is not frail. So our to-do list. Don't jump ship. Eat the meal and stay under the Lord's protection. In humility, He's the one that will bring us all through. Now, those things sound easy, don't they? I want to tell you, in my marriage over the years, my wife and I really struggled to have children. When we got married, we had 4 names picked out. And a couple weeks ago, I was going through my office. I was going through all my books, sorting some things out and moving some things around so I could access some things that I want now. I mean, we have time right now to do all that. And I found a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper, we wrote down back in 1995 when we got married, we wrote down the 4 names of our children. And then after we were married, we struggled for over 10 years to try to have a child. And that was tough because we had those 4 names written down. And it was wonderful finding that piece of paper, but it was also such a reminder in everything we're going through that the Lord sometimes is very slow in keeping His promises by our standards. We didn't adopt my son until 2010. 2010. From 1995 to 2010, we had no children. But Paul Kenneth Kenner used the first boy name on that list. Jocelyn Marie used the first girl's name. Even if you've had to wait a long time, can I tell you, don't jump ship? Because I'm glad I never did. And I'm glad my wife didn't. Because if you're ever around us or see our kids, I wouldn't trade them for anything. And Dana and I now feel a little bit like we know what the Lord was doing when He made us wait. When we lost a child, we had all the questions and all the hurts and all the pains. When we lost our child, we weren't sure if we'd ever be able to eat a meal again. Pain was so intense. After all those years, after all those struggles, thinking it was over. But we ate the meal. We pulled ourselves together. And we kept going. We never really planned on adoption. But when it happened, we got the call for Paul. Later, when we got the call for Josie, we were so humbled. It wasn't about us. It wasn't about us making a child or finding a child or producing our family. It was about God building our family for us through only ways that He could. And why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because in your life, you need to not jump ship. Because for whatever reason, Dana and I were gifted by the Lord that we didn't jump and we stayed in it and we were faithful and God delivered our family and gave us 2 beautiful children. And we ate the meal, we recovered from deep personal pain, and we stayed ready to follow Him. And we've stayed humble under His protection. And now our little church exists that I miss so much on Sundays. But I know it's going to come back because just like Paul on this boat, I know if we stay faithful and we stay ready and we stay humble, if we follow the things on the to-do checklist, then God will make us ministry ready. Because at the end of this, I got to tell you, Paul goes to Malta. You don't know what that means. But I'll tell you, Malta is an island that he never would have went to otherwise. And amazing miracles happen there. And a very strong church is built there. And unbelievable faith is founded there. God does some great work through Paul on Malta where he would have never been if he jumped ship, if he didn't eat the meal, if he didn't stay humble. I'm telling you from my personal experience from looking at this biblical story, these are key. And right now, whatever you're going through, and maybe in the future you've gone through something, maybe in the past you can, I want to tell you, if you couple faithfulness to the Lord with readiness to serve Him and humility always before Him, you're mission ready. Are you mission ready? Are you ready to face the mission that lies before you? And I don't know what your mission will be. My mission has been to our 2 kids, to our beautiful little church. That's been my mission. My mission has been to love my wife more dearly. And I got to tell you, when I found that list of those 4 names going through things, I was humbled. Because at the time, we couldn't believe how good God would be to us by making us wait. By giving us 2 of the most precious children that you could ever meet. And there's something I always tell my kids. I'm so glad I get to be your dad. Now maybe your kids are biological kids to you. Maybe you didn't adopt. Maybe it didn't take a lot of years. Maybe you had them right away. Maybe you take them for granted. Could you go to your children, call your children today and say, I'm really thankful that the Lord allowed me to be yours. I'm really glad that I got to be your mom or your dad, because it's a blessing. And in the faith, when Paul gets to Malta, he's going to find people there to share the gospel with, and he's going to get to be, in a way, their spiritual father. Because he was faithful, he was ready, and he was humble, and it made him mission ready. Whose spiritual parent can you be? Who can you share Christ with? And here's the story of your life that you can share with somebody, that you stayed with Christ, that you were ready to serve him as best you know how, and that you stayed humble and were never arrogant before him. And that'll make you mission ready. If you want to share your faith with somebody, those are great things to do. Is right now we're on this boat in this storm. If you want a to-do checklist, that's your to-do checklist. That's hard to do. You may look at this story and think, well, it was easy for him. No, it wasn't. But his life was built on faith. He spent time with the Lord, being ready to serve him, and he was humbled many times before the Lord. You know, that day on the road to Damascus when Paul first met Jesus, it was so humbling because he was so filled with his rage and his righteousness and what he was going to do. He wasn't faithful. He wasn't ready. But man, he got the humility. And he grew in faith fast. And he grew in readiness fast. And he became mission ready to follow the Lord wherever he went over all the years. My friends, I hope you're going to have a lot of years in your life to spend your life the way you want, doing some things that you want to get done. I hope you live to be old. But as you're living to be old, I hope you learn to be mission ready. I hope you have I've seen and tasted a few of these things as I've shared in my story, and I see some of what's going on in Paul's, and encourages me even more to stay faithful, to stay ready, and to stay humble. Because that'll help us to meet the mission work ahead, and the mission field is ahead. So as we close out tonight, as always, keep it together until we are together. Oh, I said tonight because I recorded these the night before, but I really should say today, in your Sunday, in our Sunday. I'm live in the chat right now, also watching and following along with this and answering any questions. If you have any questions later on after this message or a story or anything you'd like to share with me, I'd love to hear it. I really miss those talks with people right now. But let's keep it together until we're together. Let me pray for you. Dear Heavenly Father, I just pray right now that you would help us. That you would help us to keep a checklist. Help us not to jump ship right now, even when things are tough. Help us to be faithful to you and to the family of God. Help us, Father, to eat the meal that you prepared in front of us. Help us to remember your body broken, your blood given for us. Help us to be ready because of your great sacrifice to sacrifice things from our lives for you. And Father, help us to stay humble. Stay under the protection of our leaders, the leaders of this world that you've put in place, even when we don't trust them, even when we don't understand. Father, help us to stay humble, knowing how frail we are. That those leaders will ultimately be accountable for you for what they did. Dear Heavenly Father, help us to be mission ready by being faithful, ready, and humble. Father, when we get to dry land, help us to give thanks because it's you that brought us here. It's you that brought me to my Malta, a place in life right now at 50 I never thought I'd be in. Starting over with a church plant with 2 small kids at 50. That's to your glory, Father, and I thank you for it. Be with my friends. Be with our church people. Be with all those watching this video. Help us to praise your holy name when you bring us through every storm. Help us to keep our eyes on you so we know how to stay together because of you. Help us to keep our eyes on you so we know when to eat. Help us to keep our eyes on you, to keep us humble, to keep following you. And Father, help us to go to new mission fields that we will be able to share the gospel with others. Father, you bless us as we're able to bless others. Help us to be vessels for your love. It's the highest form of discipleship, containing you, being like Jesus, showing light into a dark place. Father, I know sometimes that comes at a long wait, learning dependence on you and you alone. Help us to have that strength, to have that weight. In Jesus' precious name, amen. Well, my friends, usually I close out right here, but I want to say one more thing. I want to say thank you. I've gotten so many nice messages about these videos. I really appreciate it. I've had some people really step up to send some giving. And it's not about giving. I'm not trying to give giving, but I am trying to thank people that have been moved to give even during this time. I wasn't sure at first how our little church would even continue. But people have prayed and blessed and encouraged and spoken. And it's really been wonderful. I wrote a 2 weeks worth of devotions. And if you'd like those, let me know. Message me any way you want. And I will send the devotional booklet out to you free of charge. It's 2 weeks of daily devotions, and I'm working on another 2 weeks now. So if you're doing that, when you run out, hopefully I'll have 2 weeks more written by then. But thank you to everybody who likes and shares and comments on these, and I hope you're uplifted and encouraged. It's encouraging me to encourage you, even in this tough time. And I really want you to know, even though I can't physically see you right now, I hope to. And if I don't get to pray with you and encourage you here, when we get home, come up and grab my neck. There won't be any viruses there. And let's thank the Lord and be together. All right. Until next time, my friends, I love you.